So what we talked about language, we talked about adaptation, we talked um, about different attributes of thinking. And so let's just kind of talk about thinking skills here. Uh, Question is, I always ask this to the CPA guys. I ask them, do we really need all this memorization that the CPA asks in the age of Google? And they actually change a little bit. 2 years ago, I had one guy that was one of our alumni come, and he was one of the psychometricians of the CPA exam. And we asked him that question, and they said, well, we are kind of changing the exam, and the exam is evolving to more of a problem-solving type of thing. They call it experiential. And actually, the new exam is more experiential. Still, it's very, very heavy in memorization. And what I always say is the half-life of the memorization is about 2.5 years. So in 5 years, most of you will remember 70, 80% of the fixed rules. So if you take the exam now, when you become a manager, you won't remember most of it. But I always say, Mr. Google will remember it. And in 5 years, we are going to have much, much better knowledge enhancement tools. So I think the CPA exam is a method of create and keep a monopoly on the profession, restrict entry to the profession, and so the people that's rights of payment. I actually the rights of entry, I actually think is a waste, and they should do it differently. But I haven't got my way yet, although they have changed it. And so back to the thing is, do we need the same thinking skills we had in the past? Why should we memorize facts and figures when search engines, databases, and increasingly powerful handheld devices make them available? My brother is probably the smartest person I ever met. He passed away about 6 years or 10 years ago. And he knew about everything and remembered everything. Was really, really impressive guy. But, he knew it because he read a lot, he was constant reading, and etc. I don't think that remembering facts in the future will be really intelligence. And if you look at the history that we talked about the gatherers and etc., and Gutenberg and etc., basically in the old days, many people that were the smartest were the people that could tell oral stories. And then people that could read, and then people like my brother that had encyclopedic knowledge. And now, with Google and etc., I'm always amazed by, for example, my daughter-in-law sits out on the table with her cell phone with her, and we're having a discussion. She seems to be distracted. What she's actually is following up the conversation with facts on the internet, which is, I don't know if that's good manners, but certainly very good for the function. So I think we need to kind of think about this. And then the question is, does that make memory an obsolete brain function? And no, because you need to link basic facts that you know in your head. And you need to, I already made this experiment. I had 2 students that were like freshmen or sophomore, try to put a balance sheet together for a company just with internet knowledge. And it was very, very difficult. And so let's think about the new concept of intelligence. Once we get seriously into augmented cognition and virtual reality is kind of, I actually showed you a little bit about that. Um, I just remembered, Abby, we have Max, don't we?
Yes, but he is not here, so we just need to continue.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we'll find another way to show what Max is doing. Uh, the one who has advantages and the one who is brilliant, but the one can sit in front of the computer screen and respond best. And of course, sometimes there is a timely factor, meaning you can respond fast. The other time is there is a multivariate kind of effect. So, but we need to start thinking that intelligence is basically a linkage of man-machine and etc. And then the whole question happens is that as you don't remember telephone numbers and etc., the question is, are your brains being rewired? And the technology is rewiring our brains. Senora Volkov, director of National Institute of Drug Abuse. She and other research compared, and this is something that we all feel. She and other researchers compared the lure of digital stimulation less to that of drugs and alcohol than to food and sex, which are essential but counterproductive excesses. It's kind of funny. And actually, your brain capacity, you have to remember keystrokes, you can't be looking at that, etc. So you basically finish up using memory in different ways. But there is no question that cell phones and computers have transformed life. I actually have been working on computers for decades, and I never really expected a hand computational device to be so powerful. And I think eventually, not too far in the future, there'll be little cell phones like iPhone 20 that basically will totally replace laptops and computers by having projection visual images or doing things that you'll be able to do that you do with your computers pretty much all in your cell phone or in some other device that will provide, maybe something projecting directly into your brain and etc. And then this whole thing is a discussion of, what is the brain effects of spending so much time in your computer or in your cell phone. And again, because the brain is so flexible and so pliable and so adaptive, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. And then the other thing that I notice with my students, and you notice among your friends, is that you are always juggling emails, phone calls, and other things, and you are using two or three data streams in your brain. And for example, I watch football with my son, and he puts second screen on because waiting for the play to restart is too boring. So picture in picture or picture in picture in picture, and then he's also playing in his cell phone. So you become very addicted to the dopamine of your brain on these things. And why am I talking about this? First, for you to observe it. Second, for you to try to manage it yourself. Try to think, what is the right balance of devices against some free thinking? I have, since I'm in Long Island, every morning I walk for about an hour, and I find it very refreshing to have some time to think and focus on certain things. I find it very interesting. So what the other thing, and the effect of multitasking, there is tremendous fractured thinking. And a lot of people have been arguing that these days you should take time off. Basically say, for 3 hours a day, I don't touch my computer, nor my cell phone. Meaning there is no empirical evidence to say that that's good or that's bad. This is for the scientists to do in years, but it's something for you to consider. And finally, the etiquette question of using cell phones. Is it okay to text while you're having dinner with your family, or with your girlfriend. Meaning, it always amazes me. I go to a nice restaurant, there is a young couple there, probably on a date, and both of them are texting, not talking to each other. Kind of, and then they sending text message to each other across the table. I find that awesome. And then the other thing is, what can you say on the internet that's not a bad word? And then, is it okay to BCC? I do a lot of BCCing. Is that acceptable? And then, of course, what we talk about privacy on the phone. And so this slide actually talks about basically brain working and et cetera, et cetera. And what you look at this is you kind of understand a little bit what the different areas of the brain are doing and what they direct. We also discovered in our conversation before that if there is a damage to a part of your brain, the brain tends to rebalance as much as it can. If the damage is very large, it's a different story. But the brains are very pliable. And that's very interesting because then you start thinking about if it can rebalance because of damage, it can rebalance by usage. So part of your brain that was used to store telephone numbers now is using something else. And if you don't do very often something with your brain, that part of your brain gets reallocated. And if the brain is like computers, there are parts that have to be left idle, or you're going to get very confused. So all these things is kind of worthwhile thinking about. Concluding, it's still humans who are in control of the technology and will determine whether advancement technology enables will make a position negative or positive impact in the world. I actually have an opinion about that. I think that technology will make your life much more comfortable. I think it will be very difficult to go back to not having cell phones or whatever on that domain. I don't think it will happen, even with very adverse situations. But I think we need to kind of manage technology much more than we do today. I also think that our societal methods of creating legislation and setting rules and etc., which are very necessary, are not very appropriate for this era. I said this in the beginning, of course, I'm going to say it again. The rules for taxis are not very good for Uber. The rules for hotels are not very good to Airbnb. I think the rules of the FASB and of the GASB are not very good for the current generation of technology. And they need to kind of learn how to advance and to change the way to manage it. And so don't go into the thing, I don't have time. Question, our brains are adaptable to an incredible extent. These are the references that I put in there. And then I wanted to kind of make you think about this. And I actually, it's not only about the answer to this, which we are not going to happen, but it's about the method of thinking about this. What happens on something that's already happening? A lot of the interaction with your devices stopped being your fingers and became your mouth. So basically you talk to Siri, you talk to Alexa, you leave verbal messages that can be transcribed or not, and etc., etc. So is there going to be a future whereby there is no keystrokes, it's all voice? What do you think about that? I'll give you another technical information. The quality of voice recognition and language recognition is really, really improved. Meaning computers and these interactive devices are much better to interpret what you are telling to them. And I would say even us researchers are doing better in getting understanding out of semantics. Although they understand, basically computers don't understand semantics very well. They basically do very mechanical type of things with semantics. But the question is, what's going to happen of language as a form of interaction? Remember, computer code is very structured, is less verbal than a 5-year-old, etc., etc. And so, what's going to happen? Just look at this story of language and technology. In '54, IBM and Georgetown showed machine translation. In around 70, a little bit earlier than that, this film 2001, A Space Odyssey was released. I imagine most of you saw it, but if you didn't, it's a story of people in a spacecraft that progressively the computer takes over the spacecraft as a superhuman and says to the person, well, you are not important enough, we are going to dominate this. And he manages to jump close to the memory and start removing memory frames and basically recovers it. But it's a very interesting story. I always use that when I talk about robots. And then, of course, in the 70s and 80s, there had been a lot of funding on space recognition, on word recognition, and etc. And what actually happened, and I mentioned this on language translation earlier, is that when they basically identified the fact that there were many libraries around that had same forms of uteruses in different languages, and the computers became very powerful and with large storages, the brute force method of machine translation came into being. And a lot of the semantic analytic stuff that happened today are really a lot of brute force applied. So when you do hello Siri or and I'm going to say quietly here because my device might recognize this. And when you say these things, part of it is local, very few of it, and a lot of this go to the cloud. And of course, that creates privacy issues and other questions. But there is no question that in the last 5 years, the semantic abilities of devices became very, very powerful. Still not even close to the level of subtlety and machine understanding and speech understanding that the child has or you have. But it really, really much better. And that's good enough, can do a lot of very useful things. Okay, and actually these slides, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, these slides, I talk about speech recognition and error rates. And it basically brings us to all kinds of questions about this environment.